Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. I'm going to give it just a minute or two for people to join. All right, it is just after 1. So I'm going to go ahead and hop in and get the webinar started. Next slide, please. Wanted to start with a quick check-in question for participants, and if you could pop your answer in the chat, that would be great. What's your name, your location, and your organization? And then does your organization have a volunteer program? Either one that you participate in as a volunteer or one that you coordinate on behalf of your organization? While people go ahead and pop that information in the chat, I will kick us off. My name is Sharifa Love Schnoor, and I'm the Director of Corporate Relations here at Independent Sector. Today, I am joined by Dr. Kevin Miller, the Director of Research and Policy Analyst at Independent Sector, Hillary Crow, Vice President at U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and Dr., but don't call him Dr., Nathan Dietz, a researcher at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy and the Do Good Institute. Thank you so much for joining me today and for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. We are here to talk about the value of volunteer time, the value of serving, and our recently released Value of Volunteer Time report. I think we can pop down the check-in slide, but please do keep sharing where you're from and if your org has a volunteer program. So I wanted to start out with Hillary. You work at the Chamber Foundation and the Civic Trust Initiative. Can you share a little bit about what Civic Trust is?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So at the U.S. Chamber Foundation, our focus is really on strengthening communities and how businesses play a really important role in that. So the Civic Trust is a nonpartisan educational initiative focused on elevating civics really as a national priority from, with programs that advance and promote civic knowledge in schools, but also in workplaces and across communities. And what that means in practice is helping workplaces become places where people can build civic knowledge and civic skills and a sense of connection, and really think about ways to meaningfully participate in their communities and how employers can help bridge those gaps. And volunteerism is one of, I think, the clearest and most immediate ways that happens. It really takes civics sort of out of the abstract and turns it into something tangible, something people can actually do. And that includes anything from, volunteering with nonprofits to civics roles, like serving as an election poll worker or on a jury. There's a lot of different ways that people can participate directly in their communities, but also in our civic life. And so we're working to bring those together.
That's so great. Uh, Kevin, Nathan, how do the two of you see volunteerism fitting into this sort of civic engagement environment that Hillary's talking about?
Do you mind if I go first, Dr. Miller? Okay. Well, I agree with Hillary. I think the way that we study volunteering here at the Do Good Institute and the way I study volunteering and the way that we conceive of it at the Do Good Institute is that it's part of the menu of choices that you have as a community member, as a neighbor, as just someone who's trying to figure out how to solve community problems. There are a number of ways in which you could get together with people to try to address a community problem, figure out what a solution looks like, and then work toward that solution with everyone else. Volunteering is just one of those ways, and I think we what we do at the Dugan Institute is try to teach our students just to not just the mechanics and the art and science of trying to identify community problems and trying to develop solutions, but we try to develop the appropriate try to figure out what type of activity is most appropriate. Here's where we are in terms of this particular community problem. What should we do that's going to be most effective right now? And then maybe what could we do later, but most importantly, what should we do right now? Uh, in my own research, I think of volunteering. I do a lot of work, of course, with independent sector around this time of year to talk about the value of volunteer work, and we'll talk more about that as we go along. I've also done some work that uh, really focuses on the relationship between volunteering and other forms of civic engagement. We did that in particular for the Generosity Commission. We put out a couple reports that led to their big national report that they published in, I think, late 2024. And the Generosity Commission was not motivated by the question of why isn't there more volunteering, but by the question of what's happening in the charitable donations world, because we're seeing a decline in the percentage of people who are donating to charity. Is there some sort of generosity problem in America? So we studied, the relationship between volunteering and other forms of civic engagement to try to get a handle on that question. What is the relationship between volunteering and giving and everything else that, like Hillary said, people do in their communities? And I think maybe it's counterintuitive, but for instance, there's a fundamental positive relationship between volunteering and giving. You might not expect that because if you think about it, you might think, well, some people have more time than money, so they contribute that. Some people have more money than time, so they contribute that. The fact is that, the people who contribute just choose the right mode of contribution to make. And there are people who don't contribute, but the people who do just choose the right way to contribute depending on what's appropriate. Um, the other thing is, many organizations, I think, tend to either want donors or want volunteers, and some people get the wrong impression about which is more important to the organization at any point in time. I think the organizations that are most forward thinking are the ones who encourage people to contribute in whatever way works for them, and they'll find a way to make that work for the organization. But contribution is the most important thing, and they try to encourage that.
Yeah, I'd say that also volunteering, especially for a nonprofit organization, gives you a connection to the issues that motivate that organization and the work they do. So, my go-to example, right, is you can volunteer at a soup kitchen, but at the end of the day, working there might help you realize that you need to be more involved in food stamp policy or state, local, federal policy on food access. And so that can, be an opportunity for people to, show up to local hearings, to vote, to organize their friends to vote. And so, we see it as a doorway into other kinds of active work as well.
Yes, it certainly is. I would say I grew up volunteering with my grandmother. She ran a feeding program out of the basement of her church. I went with my mother to help teach English as a second language, and volunteering was just a part of the fabric of my family. So it's something that I continued to do later. I volunteered on the executive board of my rugby team which ended up being very formative for my career because it was a crash course in nonprofit governance, financial compliance for nonprofits. It was like, oh, you wanted to play rugby. Also learn how to be a 501(c)(3). I've done some other things. I'm very passionate about dogs, so I'm a community dog walker. My current project is to eradicate mosquitoes in our neighborhood. We have a big grassroots movement there, and I'm the block captain. So can you guys share your personal connection to volunteering? Hillary?
Well, I love to hear the rugby analogy. I think sports and any sort of team activities really teach us so much more about ourselves and how to be good teammates and leaders than just the sport itself. Volunteerism for me has always been something really close to my heart, whether it was in college. I volunteered as a mentor to, I went to school in DC, and so I volunteered as a mentor and tutor to students in Southeast DC after school, and throughout my life have, volunteered at many food, soup kitchens and shelters and all of that. And as a mom now, I have three children, and so we are really thoughtful about how we can use all of our resources to help those around us, both through our giving and through our time. And so, what I've seen both personally, but also through our work, is that volunteering really changes how people see their role in the community, right? So when you move from just observing to contributing, it creates a different sense of ownership, right? You're not just part of a place, but you feel a responsibility for it, a responsibility to help bring positive change and impact. And so that shift is really powerful. And it's what we're trying to scale, right? Helping more people see themselves as active participants and contributors instead of just observers.
Yeah, absolutely. Kevin, can you share from your perspective?
Yeah, I was gonna make the point that Nathan already did, so I'll just, reemphasize it, right? For me, like I'm one of those people with more money than time now, but my experience volunteering at a food pantry, my interactions with a local animal shelter, right? Like I now have those regular donations set up, right? Because in part because I had those connections and those experiences to realize, oh, this is what these organizations do. These are the cool people who work there, and it was, really helpful for my commitment to be a donor.
Yeah, I would just add that I'm thinking about the volunteer work that I do now, and I think what one unifying theme among all these volunteer opportunities, or you might say responsibilities in some cases, but in all these cases, I feel like I'm really helping the organization by doing this work. I feel that, and in many cases, not all, but many, I feel like the organization appreciates the work that I do. I think most volunteers are looking for opportunities like that. They're more than happy to try to help to solve community problems, but they don't want to do it in such and they're not looking for excessive praise or anything like that, or particular specific rewards, but they would like to get the feeling that the work that they're doing is appreciated by the organization that they're working with. And so even if it's not the most fun type of volunteer work that you're doing, maybe if you don't get a lot of particular enjoyment out of doing a certain task, if you feel like you're doing it to help an organization that you want to strengthen, and you're going to help the organization achieve its mission, then that's enough motivation, I think, to do volunteer work. I'm thinking in particular, I live in a condo building, and it's a small one in DC, and I've been there for so long that I've been the association board president for a long time. Now, many days, most days, I would say, it's nothing but a headache to do that work. But on the other hand, I live there. I'm part of my community. I benefit from the fact that our building has somebody responsible looking after it. And if I have to be that person, then that's okay. So sometimes volunteer work takes that, has those characteristics, but that's all right too. That's what helping a community is all about.
Yeah, and I'll say, as a fundraiser, I love that we're hearing a few ways the pipeline from volunteer to donor. That's definitely something where having a connection with an organization can then encourage you to give of yourself in other ways, like monetary donations. So we love that. Nathan, we are ultimately here to talk about our value of volunteer time report. But before we get to the report information, I wanted to ask you, why do we measure and give volunteering a monetary value? And why do you think that's important?
Mhm. Well, when you think about that question, why do we measure and give volunteering a monetary value? You can approach it an answer just by emphasizing different words in that sentence. Um, why do we give it a monetary value? I don't think that it's because you want to equate donations of money and donations of time. That's not at all what we're trying to do. We're just trying to get people to understand that, volunteering does have a measurable impact. And we do that mainly because there are not that many ways to demonstrate that. Um, it's hard enough to get data on volunteering, honestly, in this day and age. The federal government has a survey that it does every 2 years that gives reliable statistics on volunteer work. And then there are other people who are trying to characterize that. But at a national level, to get a measure that everybody understands and agrees upon, it's hard. Um, so trying to figure out how to place value on volunteering is difficult. This is a process that an independent sector has used for decades now, and it's well enough established that it's and commonly enough used that it is kind of a longstanding, uh, much appreciated, much respected way of doing this work. Um, why do we measure volunteering? Uh, well, why do we do it? I think that's because not very many other people do this. I think we as independent sector, have probably have some of the best established methods of doing that. Um, the issue is that there are very few ways for nonprofit organizations to do this work themselves unless they really want to. Um, I think the main reason for that is because there's no way to report the value of volunteer work on Form 990, where organizations report on the monetary value of everything else that they do, as well as the value of the resources that they use. Uh, the accounting system that you use could possibly allow organizations to keep track of the monetary value of volunteer work, but the tax code doesn't allow for that. The tax code has very specific rules that say you can only recognize the value of donated time under very specific circumstances. And most volunteer work doesn't meet the criteria that allows organizations to report the value of donated time, like they would be able to report the value of donated goods or things like that. Um, so organizations are kind of at a loss because there's no way for them to even talk about the value of volunteer work to their organization. And so from the organization standpoint, it might seem like nobody cares except for them, the value that the organization gets. The upshot is that we, as analysts and as students and observers of the nonprofit sector, we don't have a way to uh, get much data on this except in projects like this. And I think that's where the value of measuring uh, volunteering by placing a monetary value on it really comes to the fore.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, Kevin, I think we're ready, to hear the big number of the 2025 value of volunteer time.
Thanks, Sharifa. Yeah, so this number came out last month, so people on this call probably have already heard it, but I want to make sure that everyone is, on the same playing field as far as understanding here. So the value of volunteer time is a report we put out because it's part of our broader workforce, research, workforce programming at IS. As Nathan said, we've been doing it for about 20 years now, and our partnership with Do Good Institute is more recent, but has, I think, improved the product. Again, so the most recent data we have from 2025, we found the average value of an hour of volunteer time in the United States was $36.14. It's up about 4% from last year. And I also want to point out again, just it's not in the text here, but in case people want to know where does that number come from, generally, the general answer is it's the value of non-farm, non-managerial wages is the basis for that number. And those data come from the current employment statistics data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So if you have more questions that you want to answer live, Nathan is the expert who will be able to tell you all about little tiny details. And if not, all the methodology is on our website, which actually on the next slide, here's a QR code and a URL. If you haven't been to the Value of Volunteer Time website, you should go. We have an interactive map that shows the value of volunteer time across all 50 states, plus DC and Puerto Rico. We also have more on like shareable social media graphics to share the number in your state. We have historical data. If you're the kind of person who really likes to see numbers over time, we've got that for you. And also, again, we've got detailed methodological information. So we build this to be as useful as possible. And I'll just use this opportunity to say, if you do use our number and you want to know more about it, if you want to tell us that something's missing that you want, please let us know. We're always eager to get feedback and input on what people find useful. So yeah, please check out the website.
That's awesome. Thank you, Kevin. I also want to thank you for your brevity on the methodological portions. I did threaten him upon pain of death to not overdo it on the research bits. Hillary, when you hear that number, what does that make you think of in terms of what it means to the charitable sector?
Well, I think, one thing I appreciate about the number is that it helps quantify something that is often invisible, sort of as we've talked about already. It sort of gives organizations in particular a way to communicate scale and to demonstrate sort of some sort of return on investment, so to speak, which is especially important when you're engaging business audiences. But I think it's just the entry point at the same time, right? We want to make sure that in addition to those numbers, that we are also telling the story of sort of what changed because of those volunteer efforts. And you may be familiar with the UPS Foundation back in 2011 set this bold goal for employees to contribute 30 million volunteer hours by the year 2030. And they actually hit that goal 4 years early. Earlier this year, they made that announcement. And on one hand, it's tremendous, right? If you calculate 30 million hours times that number, you get a pretty amazing number. But also, when you dig into how many communities were changed, what was the impact on organizations and nonprofits and people really at the heart of all of that. I think it's a tremendous way. I think measuring both the numbers and the impact make it that much more powerful.
Yeah, Nathan, what comes up for you when you hear that number?
Well, first of all, I think I forgot about the UPS Foundation's initiative to do that. I love the fact that I remember that happening. I love the fact that they came up with a big number and that they hit their target. Um, that's one of the only real rivals to a number like this in terms of demonstrating the value of volunteer work. The thing about it, though, is that was it 30 million hours or 20 million?
30 million.
30 million hours. Compared to the national amount of volunteering that you saw during that time period, that's the literal drop in the bucket. We saw about 8.2 billion hours of volunteering nationwide across all volunteers. So doing it just goes to show you, how much value that as much as 20 million or 30 million hours of volunteer work actually provides. It seems like a staggering amount of time, but the fact is nationwide volunteers provided even more, much more. Um, so that's something, talking about the value of volunteer work, it's one of the only ways to get a sense of, how much about the scale of the contributions that your volunteers are making if you run an organization, be it by just multiplying hours served by the dollar amount. And that's really valuable. That's a great way to summarize the contributions that the people you engage are making in their communities. The other thing I would mention, and I just have to mention this, even though it's methodological detail, but for the first time in recent memory, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which produces the input data that we use to calculate the value of an hour of volunteer work, has not come out even now. They still don't have the final numbers that we need to use to produce these estimates. So they have asterisks by them. They're preliminary estimates. They're probably going to be very close to the final numbers. But because the Bureau of Labor Statistics had some trouble producing data last fall because of the federal government shutdown, I think that's why they're behind in producing the final numbers we need. So just wanted to note that for posterity. We hope that, by the time this is available to people, that we do have the final numbers and we quietly replace the ones that are there and no one will ever know, but it's worth mentioning.
Thank you for the detail. And as Nathan mentioned, when they do update the source numbers, we will update our value of volunteer time numbers as well, the mean number and the state-specific numbers. Kevin, so how do people use this value of volunteer time number? And how do you think nonprofits and businesses should be using this, especially when telling their volunteer stories?
Yeah, so I'm not going to prescribe what people should or shouldn't do with the number. We get questions a lot. People are like, "Oh, how exactly should I use this number to calculate this exact thing?" And it's like, well, I'm happy to answer those questions with what I would do and my suggestions, but people can use this number however they want. I think mostly the way people use it, and I think it sounds kind of mercenary, right, is around applying to donors, appealing to donors and foundations, right? Especially small organizations don't have a lot of ways to demonstrate quantitatively their impact. So, a large nonprofit or a foundation might have a measurement and evaluation person or a whole measurement and evaluation team, but most small nonprofits don't have that. And so what they do know is they know at least an approximate estimate of how many volunteer hours they have per year, and they can put a dollar number on that impact. And that's a number they can shop around right to at donor briefings, at in grant applications. So we do hear from people that they need a number for those sorts of applications, and so in the absence of anything else, right? Which again, for most organizations, they don't have their own data. They don't have the staff time or the capacity or the expertise to create their own data. These numbers can be really important.
Yeah, for sure. And Hillary, do you see businesses using this number, or is there a sort of use case for you as somebody who's working at the chamber?
Um, I don't, not sure that I've seen the exact numbers sort of publicized or used broadly, but I think to Kevin's point, whenever you're really trying to show impact and reach and scale, these numbers are particularly important, whether that's for, grant reporting or just reporting out to your boards or to your current donors and things like that, really to show, beyond just the number of people that have volunteered, but sort of what value that really is adding. So I think there's definitely importance there. And putting the dollar value on it will never fully capture its true worth, right? It's just one way to acknowledge those contributions. But it's definitely helpful to show that scale and visibility and tell the story of the impact there. And I think those numbers can open the door to deeper conversations that can be helpful to sustaining the work longer term.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really great jumping off point for donors, funders, people in your community. Hillary, you mentioned that, putting a dollar amount on volunteering is never going to capture the whole picture. What are some of the non-monetary, pluses or contributions of volunteering in communities?
Well, for me, this is where volunteerism really becomes civic infrastructure. So one of the things that we have seen across a lot of research, including work like the American Communities Project, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but so many Americans feel connected in their personal lives, but increasingly disconnected from each other at the community level, and certainly from the country as a whole. And so at the same time, trust is declining. We're less likely to know our neighbors. We're less likely to interact regularly. And that creates fewer opportunities to engage across differences. And that's where volunteerism really matters. It gets people out into their communities, working alongside others, often people they wouldn't otherwise interact with, right? And that's how you start to rebuild what it means to be a neighbor and ultimately reduce some of the polarization, even that we're seeing, because it helps build social capital. Right, relationships across different groups and perspectives. It helps people. We talk a lot about civic skills as also workplace skills. So we talk about developing skills like teamwork and leadership and problem solving. And it builds trust between individuals and between people and institutions. Not to mention that it creates a sense of belonging, which we hear more and more about. You know, people really needing to feel connected to something larger than themselves. And volunteerism is such a great mechanism for that. And all of that together, I think, really allows communities to function more effectively and to become stronger.
Yes, for sure. I wanted to pull on a thread there. You mentioned that volunteering in your community can make you feel more of a sense of belonging. And I think belonging has definitely had a glow up, I'll say, in the past couple of years. And so,
Yeah.
Kevin, I wanted to ask you, what are some ways that volunteering can add to an individual's life, outside of sort of the purely altruistic motivation, that we sometimes paint volunteerism with? So, belonging is probably one of the benefits.
Yeah, I think the sort of the personal benefits of volunteering parallel a lot of the social benefits, like that Hillary was talking about, right? So there's the belonging and connection thing, right? Which again, it's that's a social good. It's something that our communities need, and also it's something that can be really helpful for people who would otherwise be disconnected, right? You can make friends volunteering, you can find new groups to join, etc. I think also with regard to picking up new skills, right? Like you were saying, like you volunteer for your rugby club, and then you know how to create a 501(c)(3). But which is great for the community that more people know how to do that. But it also potentially, right, those skills you pick up can be good for you personally in your career. It's not like volunteer jobs usually lead to paid jobs, but also that's not a thing that happens. Organizations sometimes have volunteers who end up making sort of a pathway into an organization to get to do paid work as well. So like there are non-altruistic benefits to it, which I think is important to point out to people because we want to get a wide net of people volunteering, and it's important to emphasize, right? Like this isn't thankless toil. This isn't sad, depressing work. Like people who volunteer say they do it often, right, because it feels good, because it's fun and interesting. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not just the community that benefits, but it's also the individuals doing the volunteering.
Yes. Um, yes, I've learned a lot about nonprofit management from my volunteering. Nathan, I wanted to ask a few questions about the specific number in the specific report. We have this sort of average number and we have state breakdowns. Do we have the value of like specific volunteer tasks? Do we know a value for outside of the US?
Um, well, what we have, and this goes for states, I think, the same way it goes for the nation at large, except to a slightly smaller extent. But what you see when you look at the numbers that we're providing, the dollar valuations that we place on an hour of volunteer time, uh, they vary not because the workforce. Well, they vary in part because the workforce varies in its composition across states, which is related to the fact that the general cost of living is different across different states. That's what's really being reflected in the variation in the state values of volunteering. Um, but We can dig deeper. We haven't done this because when we produce these aggregate numbers, they're just based on the characteristics of the overall workforce. And each state is big enough, even the small ones are big enough so that those small differences kind of average out. Um, the interesting thing about that is that we're the estimates are based on a very particular type of assumption about how to calculate the value of volunteer work. It represents because it's based on wages of the people who are working in the workforce in a particular place, whether it's the state or the country, then the dollar value represents the amount of money that an organization would need to pay somebody to do the work that a volunteer does for the organization. That's a different that's in other words, the value is placed on the cost of hiring someone to do this work. It's not necessarily placed on the value of the work that's being done. It's being placed on the value of the person who's doing the work. And that's a subtle difference, but it's really important. If you think about someone who's maybe an accountant and you ask this accountant to volunteer with an organization, a lot of organizations want this accountant to do so-called skills-based volunteering. They really need help with their finances. Um, and if the accountant provides that kind of work, pro bono accounting work for the organization, then I'm sure it's going to be valued by the organization. But consider the possibility that the accountant may not want to do accounting in his or her spare time. Maybe they get enough of it in the paid work and they volunteer to do something different and take their mind off of what they do for a living. Um, so then that raises a question, how do you value the work that the accountant is doing if they're not doing accounting? Uh, do you value it based on the time that the value of the hour that they might spend working if they weren't volunteering, or do you base it on the value of the work that they're actually doing if they're not doing accounting? You get very different numbers. The interesting thing about that is if you look at national stats and carry through the process of estimating the national value of an hour of volunteer time based on each set of assumptions, you end up getting numbers that don't look very different. So that only happens, of course, because the national workforce is so big and so has so much variety. For an individual organization, you probably do care a lot about the type of work that a volunteer in a particular case is doing. Maybe not so much about what they do for a living, but certainly about the value of work that they do. Um, and that's why independent sector, I think, is going into the business this year of trying to estimate the value of working in particular industries, the value of getting more granular geographical estimates of the value of volunteer time. That's not something that independent sectors tried to do, but I think we're going to try to do that later this year. Um, the thing is, though, we wouldn't need to be doing this much work at all to characterize the value of volunteer time if we as a we as a government, and this goes for state governments too, if we had made more of a commitment to calculating the value of volunteer work. When you talk about calculating the value of volunteer work overseas, you can find a lot of countries where they take not the nonprofit sector more seriously in terms of measuring its contributions. They take volunteer work more seriously by trying to be specific about placing values on it, and it really makes those of us who are trying to do this in the U.S. kind of jealous because there are places where it just seems like these questions are much more important. I don't think it's a reflection of how important volunteer work is to Americans. I think it is the fact that we've set up a system where organizations don't really have much incentive to report this to anybody. They have plenty of incentive to calculate it and to manage to it, but not to report it to anybody, um, uh, not the government, and therefore not to researchers. And that I think is the big difference between the value of measuring the value of volunteer work in the U.S. versus trying to do this in other countries. It's just a lot easier to do it in other countries because it's more important to the national governments there.
Okay, very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Hillary, can you share some ways that businesses can work with nonprofits to ensure their volunteer programs are impactful? Since so often we see, volunteer programs at a business working symbiotically with nonprofits in their community.
Well, I think the biggest opportunity sort of starts with moving beyond just sort of one day volunteer events to more sustained strategic partnerships with nonprofits. And the strongest partnerships are aligned with real community needs, right? I think that's the biggest piece that sometimes people skip past. Like, oh, I'm interested in volunteering X, but if the community is not in need of X, then, there may be other more valuable ways that you can, volunteer and spend your time. And so I think when employers work with nonprofits to understand what the needs are, then they can put resources and people in the places where the biggest difference and impact can be made. And those employees can find meaningful and often skills-based ways, but also other ways to serve their communities. I think, for example, more companies are thinking about how to support civic participation through their policies, whether that's offering civic time off for employees to serve as poll workers or to fulfill jury service, as I mentioned before. And that's a different model of engagement, not just volunteering for a specific cause, but enabling participation within the systems that communities rely on. So, strong programs also, of course, need to include clear goals, feedback loops, not just tracking the number of people that volunteered, but understanding what actually changed. And at the Chamber Foundation, through our Civics at Work initiative, we are really focused on helping companies integrate this into how they develop employees so that volunteerism becomes part of leadership development and skill building and not just a standalone activity. And so connecting with those nonprofits and understanding those needs and how to really build that out in a meaningful way is really important.
Yes, I'm exciting that you guys are excited that you guys are building out the program. I look forward to hearing more about it. I wanted to ask the three of you if you could provide any sort of information about how the value of volunteer time connects to your other work or any upcoming projects that you have. Kevin?
Yeah, I'd love to start. So thanks, Sue, for the question, and keep the questions coming, folks. I think I'll go to future projects in the Q&A period and just talk about a current project right now. Again, the independent sector is partnered with the Urban Institute on their Trends and Impact Survey, which is a nationally representative survey of nonprofit organizations around the United States. And we've partnered with them to ask more detailed questions about both their paid workforce and their volunteers. And so one of the things we're eager to find out that we asked about in the survey earlier this year, in which we're going to be getting data and research analysis over the next few months, is what roles volunteers actually play at different types of nonprofits. Are they helping just with service delivery? Like, again, are they in the kitchen, in the soup kitchen? Are they doing bookkeeping work? Are they doing fundraising work? What are different types of organizations using volunteers for? And the intention of that data, right, is not just because it's interesting, though I think it will be really interesting. It's because it'll help us tailor resources or interventions, right, or trainings. And so if we find out that most nonprofits use volunteers to do a particular thing, then it means we should target a training or a resource to volunteers and not to paid staff, right? And so it'll help us, have a bigger impact in strengthening how organizations do their work. So that's just one example of other work we're doing on volunteerism, right? That isn't the value of volunteer time, but I think we'll really connect with, understanding the value. But I'll come back to Sue's question in Q&A though, because it is a really good one.
Nathan, can you share the way the value of volunteer time connects to your other work?
Mhm. Yeah, I'm actually I think one of the big projects that we're spending a lot of time on these days is actually an attempt to try to address Sue's question directly. What is the value of volunteer time if you're going to try to capture that in some other way than just placing a dollar value on it? We're doing a lot of work for some really innovative programs. I want to call them service programs, as in AmeriCorps style service programs, but they have much more of a defined workforce development component to them than AmeriCorps programs tend to do. AmeriCorps has always been kind of leery of talking about the workforce development contributions of their programs because they don't want to open themselves up to um, this kind of false equivalency type of objection to funding national service programs, which is you don't want to pay people to volunteer and you don't want to train people in national service programs to take the place of people in the paid workforce. And I think in those, I don't think those arguments are persuasive personally, uh, but I think in Maryland, in state government, the Governor Moore has really taken it really sort of grasped the importance of service opportunities, especially for young people who may not have them sort of in abundance, who just have a lot of opportunities to choose from. A lot of young people, I think, who are kind of struggling to figure out what they're going to do with their lives when they graduate high school, uh, need some help and need some guidance. So they need workforce development. They also need service opportunities because that's the way to learn about how to identify problems in your communities and make a difference, which is great for all the reasons that we've been talking about. So we're doing the evaluation work here at the Do Good Institute for the two new programs that Maryland State Government created a little over 3 years ago. Maryland Core and the Service Year Option. And one of the things we're trying to do is to demonstrate the value of being in a job, a paid job. You know, you're getting paid a regular living wage, where you are encouraged, almost mandated, to get out there in the community and do volunteer work while you're working there, and while you're picking up work like specific workforce skills. You're getting all these opportunities, and the department that runs these programs is committed to tracking the members over time to find out what kind of lasting impact this assignment has on the young people who are participating. They're primarily young people, not exclusively. But if we think that volunteer work matters and we think that it helps workforce development, then it makes sense to try to figure out what the lasting value of having an opportunity to do all that at once might have on somebody.
And Hillary, anything you wanted to add about how the value of volunteer time ties into your work around civic engagement or volunteerism?
Or we are actually launching a program nationally later this year called Civics Academy through the U.S. Chamber Foundation. And part of the Civics Academy is knowledge based, that we've developed. But part of it where folks can participate and receive credentials for modules that they complete around civic skills and civic knowledge. But another component of the Civics Academy is a volunteer piece where employers and employees are organizing ways to volunteer and give back to their communities. And something that we're really excited to build out and to launch later this year, and to really help more employers think about the impact that they can have through their employees within the communities where they operate, where they serve, where they live. And so I think I've learned a little bit through, the process of learning more about the research here and reporting, and thinking about how we can, use some of this to apply to how we're really measuring our own volunteer time and efforts through the employers that will be participating through the Civics Academy. So this has been great.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. We had a few questions come in via the Q&A chat. Kevin, I think you wanted to take the question from Sue.
Yeah, and I don't know if Sue will find this an adequate answer or not, but it's the honest one. So I think, as you said, Sharifa, belonging's having a moment, connection is having a moment. I think researchers and policymakers and activists are more interested now in these questions around like how do you determine the impact that people are having on their communities? How do you understand the importance of connection and relationships and communities? And so I think the short answer is we want to do more of that, Sue. I think one of the things I think we need to do to make it useful, right, is to make it as easy to access as the dollar number value of volunteer time number, or as easy as we can. So we get a ton of traffic to our website for the value of volunteer time number because people see an immediate use for it, right? So I think one of the things we need to do is work with researchers like Nathan and others, right, to to figure out simple ways to talk about these other impacts of volunteering, right? And maybe to quantify them, right? If we can say for every 100 volunteers, three people are likely to vote who wouldn't have voted otherwise, or something like that, right? Like start to try to come up with simple ways to talk about the broader benefits. And so I'm not sure how to get from here to there, but it's like Nathan and our team have started having those conversations, and we're eager to hear also from other people for their ideas in terms of what they think easy ways for organizations to use, estimates of or talking points about the benefits of volunteering. So we definitely want to do more on it, and we are actively talking about that. But I don't know if the others would like to share anything else on again the question of talking about the other impacts, because I think it is an important one.
I would just say the storytelling side of it takes a lot more time and resources and effort. It's something that we are trying to do even as we've been piloting Civics Academy, right? Is okay, let's talk to these employers that are organizing these volunteer days and let's get them to take their iPhones and make a short video of what did you just do and how did you help and how did that impact you as a person or your team as a team at your workplace or the community sort of all together to really show and tell those stories, so that you can really talk about those different various layers of impact, right? As the individual, as an employee, as a member of your community, and so on. And those are, maybe it's pre-surveys, it's exit surveys, it's that storytelling, it's videos, but it takes a lot of, sort of, you almost have to have a comms plan, communications plan around how are we going to tell the story and show the impact of these volunteer efforts, that makes this feel real and tangible and practical and in addition to the numeric value. And so, I think there's a lot of effort that goes into that, but it's such important work to do to be able to show and tell those stories. And we're, really diving into that now and just capturing really incredible anecdotes and impact from people across the country that are serving their communities in different ways. So I think that's one way. There's probably, I don't know, 10 others that we haven't done yet or thought of, but I think that's one piece that can really show and just not just tell, but the show not tell sort of component of the impact of volunteering.
Mhm. You know, those are all great ideas. I think I would just add one more, and it's one that you'll recognize, Sue, because we talked about it a few years ago when we worked on this report on strategic volunteer engagement. But I think it might be possible to quantify the impact of an organization that really does a good job of engaging volunteers on attracting support from philanthropic or institutional funders. Um, I think that that's a way, we haven't talked that much about ways of demonstrating the value to the organization of a nonprofit organization outside of workforce development types of benefits to engaging volunteers. But the research that we published when we produced this report shows that funders really value the fact that nonprofits that engage volunteers establish themselves as presences within the community. And this was at a time when, we weren't feeling as bad about community life in a lot of places in the U.S. as we might be right now. The data were collected in summer of 2022, I believe. And people were wondering what was going to happen, what was happening in America. But I don't think people felt as down or as pessimistic about community life as they might today. But even then, if you asked funders what they appreciated about nonprofit organizations that engage volunteers, it's that the thing that they appreciated most. They appreciated a lot about that, but what they really liked was to. Oops! Oh, we lost a couple people. Okay, well, we're still recording, and Hillary, I guess this is just you and me in the audience, but
Okay.
okay. Um, oh, here they come. Well, anyhow, what what funders valued most out of all the possible reasons for supporting nonprofits to engage volunteers was the fact that those organizations that engage volunteers were real fixtures in the community. And I think that that's something that a lot of nonprofits didn't realize. You know, that first of all, that it's possible to approach funders and try to seek support for the work that they do in engaging volunteers. I think that doesn't occur to a lot of nonprofits to do that. But if you're trying to do that, then maybe the most effective pitch is to talk about the fact that it'll enhance your presence in the community and help you engage more people and bring more people into service. Um, and so it's harder to calculate the value of bringing people into service than it is to calculate the value of making that pitch successfully and getting money from a funder. So you might be able to establish the value, the value of volunteer work that way.
Great, thank you. We are coming up on time. There's another question from Q&A, which is, have you tracked how AmeriCorps members and volunteers say their service impacted their lives? I don't believe that's a project that independent sector has taken on, but I know that AmeriCorps historically has put out anecdotes and testimonies from people who participated, and it really, changed the course of their lives for some folks. I know that the IS Chief of Staff, Mike, is always happy to talk about his AmeriCorps service if you are wanting, a personal testimonial. I wanted to thank, the panelists so much for participating. You guys all had such great insights, and once again, to refer folks to the value of volunteer time numbers that are on our website. I did also want to share information about our upcoming National Summit, which will be taking place this fall, October 13th to October 16th in Phoenix, Arizona. Registration is open, so you can head to our website and get an early bird rate until June 30th. And if you're interested in sponsoring or providing scholarships for folks to attend the summit, please reach out to me and I'd be happy to share more details on how to make that possible. I believe Sola, my comms wizard on the back end, does have a link to share for a feedback survey for this webinar. I would appreciate if you could take truly 30 to 60 seconds to provide your feedback. The link to the SurveyMonkey is in the chat. And thank you all so much for your participation. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thanks, Sharifa.
Thanks all.
And thank you all.